Okay.
Great. So Michelle, can we just start with you telling me a little bit about what your family is like and what it was like growing up?
I grew up in Rossford, Ohio, which is a suburb of Toledo, and grew up in a really sort of idyllic setting. Both my parents were incredibly supportive. They very much focused us on education and making sure that we were doing well in school. I have an older brother and a younger brother. Both my parents worked. I attended public school through 6th grade and then moved on to a private school after that. So I really don't have any complaints about growing up. It was, the worst I can say is that my parents were really strict with me because I was the only girl in the family.
Did you ever have a moment where you wish you were a boy with 2 brothers and them going a little bit more lenient on them?
I always, when I was young, wished I was a boy. The Korean culture is very sort of male-centric, or used to be. And so my brothers were always allowed to do a lot of things that I wasn't allowed to do, and I had to do a lot of things that my brothers didn't have to do. And I remember when I was in middle school, I went with our middle school field hockey team and I visited another school. It was a boarding school right outside of Cleveland. And I fell in love with it. I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I would love to go to a boarding school. So I came home and told my parents, I want to go to boarding school. And they said, absolutely not. Girls can't go away for school. Meanwhile, they were encouraging my brothers to apply to boarding schools. Neither of them wanted to go. And so it was those times that I really thought, gosh, I wish I wasn't a girl.
Well, was it a typical Korean American family, or tell me a bit about that?
I think I grew up in a typical Korean American family in some ways, in that my parents were very focused on education. They were very conservative in some ways. They didn't want me to go out late at night and that sort of thing. But there was something, I think, different from my family than maybe most Korean American kids my age, which is that my father was very liberal politically. And so he always talked to us about social justice issues and encouraged us to be involved in community service and not to take for granted what we had because he happened to be a doctor and we were more well off. And so it was because of that that I think I developed a different level of understanding about the haves and the have-nots and just the injustices that existed in the world for some kids.
And so your outspokenness, though, does that come from your mother or your father, do you think?
My outspokenness comes from my mother, though you would never guess it, because unless you know her well, you would think she's very quiet and demure. When you meet her for the first time, she defers a lot to my dad. But if you actually really know my mother, you know that she is extraordinarily competitive. She's very opinionated. She's going to let you know what she thinks all the time until you think what she thinks. So I very much get that tenaciousness from her.
How important was winning and leading to you as you were growing up and getting into college and whatnot?
I think it was something that came naturally to me. I am a very competitive person. I think I always have been. Probably some of that was encouraged by my parents, particularly when it came to academics. We were the sort of family where if you came home with an A, my mother was saying, well, why wasn't it an A plus? So it was this culture that we had in our family and in our household where you were always striving to do better. You could never, nothing was really good enough. And so, I think that winning was really important to me. I think in terms of the leadership, that was something that sort of came naturally to me. I was somebody who in high school people referred to as the mother hen. I was, sort of always giving people advice and nurturing people and kind of saying, okay, this is what we're going to do and that sort of thing. And from a very young age, took on some leadership responsibilities that I think started to teach me a lot about, the fact that can't always be popular, not always, you're not always going to be in a situation where everyone likes you. So I had those experiences from when I was very young.
Well, let me ask you this, because the one common thread that I see in almost all the women that I'm interviewing, and they're very powerful and have made huge changes, they're all outsiders growing up. Did you think of yourself as an outsider at all?
I was very much an outsider. When I was in elementary school, I was pretty much, my brothers and I were the only kids of color in the school. And so it was a very unusual experience because you are just sort of the other, and so different from everyone else. So I definitely felt that, and you know, every time kids would come over to our house, they'd say, "Oh my gosh, you know, the kitchen smells. What is that? You're eating something funny." And I was always trying to hide that and figure out how I could be like everyone else. When I went to the private school, though my parents had the money to pay for the tuition, we didn't have the same social standing as other people in the school, and so, you know, belonging to all the clubs and that sort of thing was not where we were. And so, you know, from that perspective, I also sort of felt like I wasn't always sort of in the mold of everyone else, and was very much an outsider, trying to push in and trying to fit in.
What was dating like for you, and were your parents very strict? I read a story about your mom and the dress.
Yeah. My parents were definitely strict growing up, and so I was only allowed out of the house one night out of the week, and I had to be home by 11 o'clock, so that did not do much for my dating life. I went to the prom one year, and when I put on the dress, which I had gotten at my mother's clothing store, my mother owned clothing store, she looked at me and she sort of said, I don't, this is not working for me. And it was because she felt that the front was too low. So she took out her sewing kit and she literally sewed me into the dress, both in the front and the back. I wasn't going anywhere. And when I got home from the dance, she literally had to cut me out of it. So they were very, very strict. But interestingly, I actually had a high school boyfriend whose mother was a teacher. Her name was Mary Weiss, and she was, you know, one of the very early influencers in my life around education. She taught in an inner city school. And so I went with her to the school and I volunteered in her classroom. And it was such a stark contrast from the everyday world that I was living in and the private school that I went to, that experience really helped to sort of shape my views on public education, even though I was attending a private school, because I saw just such a juxtaposition between the two types of educations.
Well, is that when you knew that you wanted to be a teacher or go into education, or were you one of those people that knew from a very early on, this is my goal in life, is to do this?
So I am not one of those people. I am the kind of person who never knew what they wanted to do from one stage of life to another. So when I was in high school, I didn't know where I wanted to go to college. When I was in college, I didn't know what I should major in. When I was graduating from college, I didn't know what I wanted to do for work. So I had experiences in Mary's classroom, but I didn't sort of connect those two. Oh, I want to be in education, or I want to be a teacher. I just sort of what I took from those experiences were there's this incredible injustice and an inequity between what is happening with poor kids and what's happening with wealthier kids that I found absolutely unconscionable. And so, you know, that was seeded in me early, but it wasn't translating necessarily to, okay, now you have to, you know, go become an educator.
So how did that happen? How did that dream come about?
You know, I decided to go into education sort of as a default. I was about to graduate from Cornell University my senior year. I had applied to some graduate schools. I got into a number of programs, interestingly enough, around industrial and labor relations. So no one would have guessed that now, but that was what I was interested in. And I also applied to Teach for America because I had seen a documentary on PBS about TFA. It looked really interesting to me. I knew my parents were not going to be so excited about the prospects of me becoming a teacher, but I thought, well, it's a 2-year program. You can go and do it for 2 years and then, you know, resume the rest of your life. And I went for 2 years, but I didn't resume the rest of my life. I was hooked. And once I had the experience of being a teacher in an inner city classroom, having success with my students and seeing what they were capable of, that was it for me. It cast the die for the rest of my career.
But it wasn't an easy start.
It was not an easy start. When I started teaching, I really, really struggled. In fact, I was a pretty bad first-year teacher. I had a lot of problems with discipline. The kids would not listen to me.
So tell me what was your worst day that you remember going into that classroom?
Yeah.
I mean, you wake up You just walk me through it.
Well, routinely I would wake up and I would have a knot in my stomach because I wasn't successful. I wasn't being successful every day, and that was really hard on me. So I would wake up and just feel it physically from the moment I woke up. And probably one of the toughest days that I had was very early on in my first year. And you have to realize that every day I would go in and the kids were just nuts. They were out of control. They wouldn't listen to anything that I said. So on this particular day that I went in, I had a conference that I needed to go to, a special education conference for one of the students. So they had to pull me out of the classroom. And they asked the librarian to cover my classroom for me. And I sort of saw it as, oh gosh, this is a nice little break in the middle of the day. I get an hour off. And I came back in the room. And the class was completely silent. Every single kid was on task. They were all doing what she asked them to. And I came into the room and I said, well, how were they? She said they were great. So she packs up her stuff and she's about to leave and she hadn't even crossed the threshold of the door yet and the kids started going nuts again. So I, screamed at the kids. I said, wait a second. I said, tell me, I don't understand. Why is it that you can behave for her and you can't do that for me? And little Anthony Miles, who was one of my biggest discipline problems, looked at me and said, because she knows what she's doing. And I thought, oh, it was the kids basically saying, we know that you can't control us. You don't, you're not so good, and that's why we act like the way we act. And I had lots of experiences like that within a relatively short period of time, where I came to realize that it wasn't the kids at all. It was me. And I had to do something to improve my practice, to ensure that I was creating the kind of environment where kids felt like they could learn, that they needed to be respectful, and they needed to pay attention to what was going on.
So, well, how do you turn that around, though? That's a huge boat to move.
It was. I had 36 kids in my class, 36 second graders, so that's a lot of kids in a classroom. And I sort of became obsessed with this idea. Having watched some of my biggest discipline problems in classrooms with other teachers doing exactly what they were, told, I realized, okay, this is about me. What can I do? And so I was a woman possessed, and I sort of decided I am gonna figure this out. So every 3 days, I'd have a different seating configuration or a different discipline strategy, and I was just trying to figure out, okay, what's gonna work? And slowly it sort of came to me, and it was just this odd thing. I instead of having the kids sitting in groups, I figured out that sitting them in a giant U with some of the kids who were my biggest challenges kind of sitting in the middle was the way to go, because then I could see everybody at all times and exactly what they were doing. And then I developed a discipline system where I would put kids' names up on the board when they were doing something good. And when they continued to do good things, I would put stars next to their name. And if they happened to do something that was, against the rules or whatnot, then I would erase a star. So it was more positively focused than negative. So it wasn't about, okay, if you get, X number of X's next to your name, then I'm going to call your mom or whatever. Instead, it was very positive focused, and I found that my kids reacted better to that. It was a challenge because that meant that for some of my discipline problems, right when they walked in the door, I'd have to sort of put their name up. Oh, great, you came to school. Name up on the board. Great, you sat down in the chair, name up on the board a star, that sort of thing, so that there was then something for them to lose. And I created this very complicated system where at the end of the day, for every star they had next to their name, they got a certain number of tickets, and at the end of the week, they could take those tickets and come to the store, on my classroom store, and exchange the tickets in for prizes. And it was a system that had evolved over time, and I've tried lots of different things, but it actually worked. And so by April of my first year, I had really turned a pretty significant corner and gotten to a place where the kids said, maybe she's not so bad. She's here for the long haul. She's not going to go anywhere. We'll actually listen to what she says.
Well, how important is it for a teacher to be there for the long haul?
I think it's incredibly important, not that you're necessarily there for 30 years, but that the children know that you are committed to them and their success. And the children that I had in my first year teaching had been together from kindergarten on, because my school tracked kids by both behavior and academics. So this was the lowest track, the kids that supposedly had the biggest discipline problems and who were behind academically. So they knew how to push each other's buttons, but they also knew how to push the buttons of teachers. So they had a series of teachers come in and out over the course of several years, and they had come to believe that, if we just act crazy, then that teacher will leave and another teacher will come in. And having a teacher actually stick with them through the entire year and stick it out with them and, through all the ups and downs, I actually think was a pivotal sort of moment of their realization that, okay, she cares about us. She's not going anywhere.
So tell me, how did you make the leap from teacher to superintendent of one of the lowest rated school systems in the country?
My journey from being a teacher in my 20s to being the chancellor of the school district in Washington, D.C. by the time I was 37 was not a typical path at all. In fact, it was probably the most unlikely path that a superintendent could take. When I left teaching after 3 years, I went to get my graduate degree in public policy at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. And after I graduated from that program, I was trying to figure out what could I do in education to have a more systemic impact. And so I started an organization called the New Teacher Project, which is a national nonprofit organization that recruited great new teachers into districts that needed high-quality teachers the most, so urban, inner-city, and rural school districts. And I ran that organization for 10 years and was very sort of active in the school reform community. I think people knew me as somebody who wasn't afraid to take on controversial issues, to speak out, et cetera. And I went to a conference one day, and the deputy mayor of education in D.C., Victor Reynoso, came up to me and he said, I want to take you out to dinner because you know all of the superintendents in the country, and we're about to take over mayoral control of the schools, and we're looking for somebody great. So I want to sit down and hear who you think is good. So I went out to dinner with him. At the end of the night, I thought he got his money's worth because I gave him 4 really solid names of people who should take the job. And then later he came up to me and he said, well, what about you? And I said, absolutely not. I would never do that. Meanwhile, sort of at the same time, Joel Klein, who was the chancellor of the schools in New York City, had developed a relationship with Mayor Fenty because the mayor wanted to take over control of schools, and so took the whole city council up to New York City to watch, what was going on there and to see that. And so Klein called Fenty one day because Fenty had been harping on Joel Klein. I need somebody like you. Find me you for here in D.C. And Klein called him one day and said, okay, I have 2 people for you. This first person is I feel like he could do it, and Fenty said, it's not, it's too much of a usual suspect, not what I'm looking for. And Klein said, well, the second one is not a usual suspect, but I don't think you can hire her, or I don't think you're going to hire her. And Fenty said, why not? And he said, because she's 37 years old, and she's Korean, and she's never run a school, and politically, that would be really almost impossible for you to pull off. He said, that said, I think she could do it. And so Fenty said, great, I need to meet her. And that's sort of how it started. I met the mayor, and at the time I said, you do not want me for this job. Trust me. And he said, what are you talking about? You're the one, I want you. And I said, no. I said, if I were to take this job, I would want to go at it with everything that I had. And what that would mean is that we would be making incredibly problematic, meaning contentious decisions, right? Decisions that would be really hard for you politically because they would stir up a lot of opposition. And you're a politician, and you want to keep your poll numbers high, and you want to keep your constituents happy, and so I am not the person that you want. And he looked at me and he said, you know what? I totally disagree. He said, my top priority in doing this job is to fix the schools. And so I want somebody who's going to come in and question everything that's happening and turn everything upside down if it needs to be turned upside down. And so I will back you 100%. You don't have to worry about the polling. You don't have to worry about the politics. And so I thought, gosh, this is I've never heard a politician talk like that. This is a school district that certainly does need a transformation. And so I thought, okay, I'll take it on.
So were you welcomed with open arms?
I was not welcomed with open arms at the very beginning. When he first announced me, I was the diametric opposite of what people both wanted and expected in a school's chancellor, and so I was initially greeted with a lot of skepticism, particularly around sort of race, because people said, there's this little Korean girl from Toledo, Ohio. Is she going to be able to relate to inner city African American parents in Ward 8 of Washington, D.C.? So that was sort of the early skepticism. I think that through the first few months, I won people over. I was out in the community constantly. I was talking to people. I was, I think I can be fairly, charming when I want to be. And so I won a lot of people over and got to the point where people were saying, okay, she's passionate. She knows what needs to happen. And so we're going to give her a chance. And, at the end of the day, I'm a very firm believer that being a mother and the fact that I put my kids in the public school system spoke a lot about how I was going to run the district, because I never, in my 20 years of being in this field, I have never met a mother anywhere who wanted anything different for her kids than what I want for my kids. And so I think people could relate to me on that level of knowing she's a mom first and foremost, and she's going to make decisions, with that context.
But you were so controversial, weren't you, down there?
Yes, very. I was a controversial figure in the city for lots of different reasons, and I think if I tried to unpack that, I would say one of the primary reasons, at least initially, was because visually it was very striking, sort of stark picture, right? Here I was leading a school district that had 80% African American kids, another 11 or 12% Latino kids, and here's an Asian American woman walking into that, a young one at that. It just caused a very stark visual. And that visual of, God, this doesn't look right. It's so counter to what we would expect to see, sort of caused a lot of people to pay attention to what we were doing. So we were under the microscope more than an average superintendent is. I think that my style and demeanor also played into that a little bit. I am somebody who is very straightforward. I'm very honest. I feel like people appreciate hearing the truth, and throughout my entire time in DC, I still do believe that I could have gone into meetings and when people were complaining about something, I could have said, yeah, I'll do what you want me to do, and then turned around and not done it. And that's not the type of person that I am. I'm going to tell you, if I'm going to do something that you're not necessarily in favor of, I'm going to listen to you. Sometimes you can change my mind, but if you don't change my mind, I'm going to tell you very honestly that that's what I'm going to do. So it was very different, I think, for some people. I'll give you an example. Very early on, I met with funders, philanthropists in the city, and I went to the meeting and I said, I'm about to say something that you are not expecting. I want you to give me a little space, because there's a lot of stuff going on right now, and I know that you have a lot of programs and priorities, but I feel like what this district needs is focus and discipline. And so what I'm going to do is choose 3 or 4 things that we're really going to focus on first. Let me fix those things, and then I'll expand from there. And people were nodding their heads and saying, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I said, but what that means is that there might be some things that are priorities for you that I'm not going to be able to address right away. And I want you to know it's not because I don't think it's important. It's because we have to have this focus and discipline. So, I got a lot of head nods. And then afterwards, people came to me and said, I totally agree with what you said, except my program. So let me tell you about that, and you really need to focus in on that. And I stuck to my guns and for a while sort of said to the funding community, look, I need to focus for a while first. As time went on, we developed our capacity, we got better, we fixed a lot of things, and then we had the capacity to take more things on. So ultimately we did get there with them, but it was, I think, very shocking to them at the outset to have somebody come in and say, I actually don't need your help right now. And again, it wasn't because we didn't want lots of different people to help us, and certainly not that we didn't want the extra resources, but one of the things that I found broken about the system was that you would walk into a school and the principal would rattle 40 programs and partners off that they had. And when you actually went into the school in the classrooms, you realized that none of that was real. They put the banner up, but they weren't implementing those things. And it's because they didn't have the capacity to treat every partner the way that they ought to be treated. And so what I tried to do is sort of really get people to focus and not to try to do 50 things and spread yourself too thin, but to do several things well. And so to schools, it was, the message was have a couple of partners and have those be really, really strong, meaningful partnerships instead of having 40 partners who are all frustrated because you won't return their calls.
But one of the other things that you did was you took on the unions.
Yes. When I got to the district, I was sort of trying to figure out how do you take a system that is so broken, so fundamentally broken on so many different levels, and that has so many things wrong with it. How do you go about fixing it? And for me, there was sort of an order of operation of what you took on. And the first to me was basic operations. So we were a school district that the kids were freezing cold in the wintertime because the heaters were broken, and they were ridiculously hot in the summertime because the air conditioners didn't work. A school district that I found hundreds of thousands of books locked up in the warehouse, and schools didn't have the books and paper and pencils and that sort of stuff, and they're all sitting in the warehouse. So it was a fundamentally broken system, and I thought you have to meet people's base level needs first. So let's make sure that people are being paid, that they're on the proper health care, that they have the books and materials that they need to teach, et cetera. So handle those first. But right after that, to me, I thought, if you look at the research, it is very clear that the number one in-school factor that determines whether or not kids are successful or not is teacher quality. So this is going to be the thing that I focus in on, teacher quality. And as a parent, I knew this too. Any parent can tell you that the experience that their kid has in school every day is so tightly correlated to who their teacher is. So if you have a great teacher one year, your child is flourishing and loves going to school. And if you have a not so great teacher, you hear it every single day. And so I thought our goal should be to have amazing teachers in every single classroom, and that's what I'm going to focus my efforts on. And it did end up causing me to have a somewhat challenging and very exciting relationship with the teachers union, because a lot of the policies that I was trying to push were so counter to the way the district unions operate that they just sort of didn't know what to do with me.
So, but you've been labeled as being anti-teacher and anti-union. Is that true? Are you?
Nothing could be further from the truth. I am the most pro-teacher person you could possibly imagine, because I was a teacher, number one. I'm a mother, number two, and I see the power that teachers have. And I think we're at an unfortunate point in the education debate in this country, because we are at a place where if you at all call question to policies pertaining to teachers and teacher quality, you get labeled as anti-teacher. So I say, for example, we should make it easier to pay great teachers more, and we should make it easier for ineffective teachers to be moved out of the profession. I feel like that's a pretty basic thing. I don't know that there's anybody out there who would disagree with what I just said, but you would think that I don't know. I mean, people have said, oh, she's anti-teacher, she's trying to bust the union, she's scapegoating teachers, etc. That's not what it is at all. What I'm saying is that teachers play such a critical role in kids' lives that we should aspire to try to ensure that every single kid is in a classroom with a great teacher every year. Well, why wouldn't we do that? And we have to have policies in place that ensure that's happening. So, for example, and this is where sort of my motherhood comes in, I knew every day as I was making decisions that I had to live with that, not just as the chancellor, but as a mom too. So, for example, we were developing a new teacher evaluation tool in the district. And we had 4 categories that teachers rated: highly effective, effective, minimally effective, or ineffective. And the policy question came up of, if a teacher is rated as ineffective, what do we do with that person? So there was debate going back and forth amongst my staff. Do we allow that person to stay on for another year or two? We professionally develop them, X, Y, and Z. And, I looked at my staff and I said, look, if we're going to let a person who has been rated as ineffective stay on for another school year, then I have to be willing to have my own kid in that person's classroom. And let me tell you, I am not willing to have one of my children be taught by an ineffective teacher. I don't know what parent in this country would say, oh yeah, I'm good with that. So if I'm not willing to make that decision for my own child, then I certainly can't expect any other mother in this city to accept that for their child. So no, if the teacher has been rated as ineffective and they have that year, to improve, and they're still ineffective, then we have to remove them from the system. That is the best thing for the children. I don't understand how that can be perceived as being anti-teacher, mostly because the people in society who have the least amount of acceptance of ineffective teachers is effective teachers. It drives effective teachers crazy when they have a colleague next door who isn't pulling their weight, who isn't doing their fair share, because they know it's not good for the profession, they know it's not good for kids, and so effective teachers are the ones who are sort of at the front of the line saying, yeah, we have to find a way to remove those people from the classroom, and that's not anti-teacher, it's pro-kid. It might be anti-ineffective teacher, but I don't know anybody out there who can look me in the eye and honestly say, I think it's good for kids to keep somebody who's not effective in the classroom.
I'm playing devil's advocate of someone who might be watching this. Of course you would fire a teacher. Why is it so difficult?
One thing that I think lots of people don't understand in society is that it is nearly impossible to fire a teacher in this country. If you look at any of the statistics around how many teachers are rated as ineffective or how many teachers are let go because of performance reasons, it is less than 1% across the nation. And if you ask school administrators, superintendents across the country, they will regale you with stories about teachers that they know are not doing the right thing by kids, who it is very, very difficult, if not impossible, to fire these folks. It's interesting. I just read a story not too long ago about a teacher in New York City who had been found passed out drunk in her classroom. Now, no, that this is the vast majority of teachers in this country are wonderful, so this is an exception to the rule. But she was passed out drunk in her classroom. People found her, tried to remove her, get her fired. Didn't happen. She sort of got reinstated with back pay and everything. And folks found her again after she was reinstated, passed out drunk in the classroom again. And after the woman actually went to get some help and became sober, she also said, I don't know why they let me, stay in the classroom. That should not have been the case. I was doing a disservice to kids, and the union who's protecting me, they shouldn't have held me up as, somebody who should have been protected. And so, I think that we can't get to a place in society where we truly value and respect teachers for what they're doing, which is just, tremendous work, unless we are also, looking at the teachers who are not as effective and saying, you can't have the privilege of teaching our kids. And, to be pro-teacher doesn't mean that you have to, protect every single teacher, even when they're not good. I think being pro-teacher means that you respect the profession and the importance of what it means to be in the classroom with kids every day. And that means that not everybody is cut out to do it. And so I think that's a nuance that unfortunately has gotten lost in the debate that we really have to find a way to recapture.
And what about people that say it's pie in the sky, that these are a lot of the kids are poverty stricken. They come from broken homes. They're not, they don't even get breakfast in the morning. So how can you expect them to learn like everybody else? And you can't put it on the teachers.
Yeah. So it drives me absolutely crazy when people, well-meaning people, who I think are good people and they care about children, lower the expectations that we have because kids are coming from challenging circumstances. So don't get me wrong, let me be very clear. Poverty matters. When a kid is coming from a family and a home environment where nobody fed them breakfast the morning of school, nobody put them to bed the night before at a decent hour, maybe the electricity got cut off in their house and they couldn't do their homework, they have a cavity in their tooth which is causing an abscess. I mean, those are real things that make it much, much harder for a child to be school ready. And you cannot ignore those factors because they do have a tremendous impact. So I want to be clear about that. On the other hand, I believe that schools and teachers and education can go a long way in helping to solve the problems of poverty in the long run. If we as a society are saying, because you're poor thing, we can't expect you to learn because look at all the problems you're having at home, we're actually not doing that kid any favors in the long run because we're lowering our expectations and we're saying, gosh, we couldn't possibly expect you to learn at high levels because you're poor. How's that helping the kid have a better life? I believe that we need to look at the challenges that they come to school with and say, yeah, those are real. Can't ignore them. But we're still going to have super high expectations for you. The data is very clear on this. Data says that if a poor minority kid living in poverty, kid of color, has 3 highly effective teachers in a row versus 3 ineffective teachers in a row, it can literally change their life trajectory. It significantly increases the chances that they will graduate from high school and go on to college. You have those 3 highly effective teachers in a row. So why wouldn't we knowing that poverty exists, why wouldn't we do everything that we could to make sure that every kid has highly effective teachers? That if that can help put the kid on a different trajectory for life. I mean, that's my mission, that's my goal, is if we know that can make a difference, and again, this is not blaming teachers, this is not scapegoating teachers, this is saying that teachers can be the answer for so many kids if we're doing what we should be doing as a system. And I'm just not willing to write a generation of children off because of the circumstance that they were born into. We have to acknowledge that circumstance and understand the challenges, but I'm not willing to say because of that, we can't help you, sorry kid.
So was taking on the union professional suicide for you and political suicide for Mayor Fenty?
There's no doubt in my mind that taking on the teachers union was politically a very, very tough call for Mayor Fenty, my boss. At the end of the day, in his re-election bid, the teachers union put $1 million into the campaign of his challenger. They were very serious about not wanting that man in office anymore and not wanting me in office anymore. The most telling thing for me, and I think this is a lesson in leadership for any young person out there, the day after the election, when Fenty lost, I felt very guilty because I thought, you know what, if this man hadn't taken on all of these, really controversial issues on school reform, he might have gotten reelected. So I sent him an email and I said, I'm so sorry. I wish that there was something that I would have done that could have allowed you to stay in office and allowed this work to continue. And he sent me an email back and he said, I don't have any regrets. He said, there's nothing that I have done in my life, nor will I do for the rest of my life, that will be as important as the school reform work that we've done over the last 3.5 years. I believe that the children of D.C. are better off for us having done this work. And if it means, me not being in office anymore, but the student achievement levels are higher, and now we have growing enrollment for the first time in 41 years, and the school buildings are fixed, it's all worth it to me. And I thought that was just so telling of his integrity, and of his leadership style, that he was willing. I mean, he took this on knowing that at the end of the day it could cost him his political career. He knew that, and he was willing to put it all on the line.
Great. And so take me through what I walk into. What's your ideal school? What does it look like? What do I see? What's happening?
You know, I think the wonderful thing about education is that you can walk into lots of different schools, high-performing schools, and see very different environments and have them still all be effective. I think the things that are consistent through any really great school is, one, you have the right culture. You have a culture of high expectations of kids, of parents, of teachers, of everyone, that there is a set of rules and norms that everybody abides by, everybody lives around, and everyone knows is a part of why learning can occur. So that culture is an important piece of it. You have a great principal. Every wonderful school has a phenomenal principal who understands how to develop both children and teachers and provide the kind of environment that everyone can flourish in. And you have classrooms that are meeting the needs of kids. And you can see excellent teachers who teach in very different ways, but all really great teachers know their kids really well and differentiate for kids. When you have a classroom full of 25 children, one of the hardest things to master as a teacher is, how do I meet the needs of every kid? Because they're all at different places, they all learn in different ways, and the most phenomenal teachers are the ones who know the quirks of every kid, know how they each learn best, and then modify their instruction to individualize for every single kid. And it's very, very difficult to do. But when you see it happening in a classroom, it's like magic.
Were you brought up so that marriage was a given, and how did that work?
I definitely grew up in a household where there were certain givens. Going to college was a given. Getting married, having kids was a given. I grew up in a very tight-knit family. And I lived in sort of an odd world because my mother, though she took on very traditional Asian woman dynamics in our household, she was always the one that cooked. My dad didn't do any household chores and that sort of thing. She was also very strong-willed, and so I kind of grew up with my mom saying, you have to be the one that packs your brother's lunches in the morning. And I thought, well, why me? Why not them? So I had that in me, but I also had that kind of the strong will and the focus. So it was a little different. And so I always knew I was going to get married. My first marriage, I got married very young. And after my divorce, I thought, I am never going to be able to get married again, because there's nobody who can live to be able to live with me. You have to sort of live with all of the kind of stuff of my professional life and be comfortable with that, and also know that in my personal life I want to be a girl. I want to cook and do the laundry and have you take out the trash and that sort of thing. So I just thought it's going to be impossible to find somebody who fits that mold.
But you have.
But I have, yeah.
Has there ever been any backlash for you for dating and then marrying someone, and actually twice, who was not Korean?
When I first started dating Kevin, who's the mayor of Sacramento, I thought, I don't know how my parents are going to react to this. But my parents love him. They accepted him. They think he's very good for me. So I think I was very fortunate on that front. His family has also been very accepting of me, and I haven't felt any sort of backlash. I mean, I'm sure that people talk about it, but they certainly don't talk or haven't talked about it in front of me. I've felt, interestingly enough, and I don't know if this is because we have so much in common on the education reform front. We're both such outspoken leaders on that front that people think, oh, that's a natural fit, or whether it's something else. But I've felt a lot of acceptance from people and nothing but sort of well wishes in our relationship and in our marriage.
Would you identify yourself as a feminist?
I definitely see myself as a feminist in a lot of ways, because I don't think that I fall into the traditional molds of what people expect, either from a woman or from an Asian American woman. And, it still drives me crazy when people say, well, sexism doesn't exist. Now there's all this equality. Yeah, right. I mean, I even in the coverage of me when I was a chancellor, people would write a magazine article and say, she was walking through the halls in her slim black pants with her Manolo Blahniks clicking on the on the hallway, and I thought, if I was a 50-year-old white guy, you would not be commenting on what my pants looked like or what shoes I was wearing. There's no way you would be looking down at the loafers, So there still is a lot to, I think, the sexism that we see. Particularly, I often found myself in situations where I'd go to meetings of superintendents and I was the only woman there. I would be the only woman of color there, so I think that the glass ceiling still exists. I think it is. You run up against lots of things. People, I think, expected me to be less blunt and frank, and more accommodating. And when I wasn't, I think that it shattered the expectations that they had, and potentially made the reaction to me more visceral in a lot of ways.
Do you think there's a difference in the way women lead and men lead, and what is that difference?
I'm not sure whether I can tell you specifically that there's a difference between the way that women lead and men lead. I can tell you, I know that my leadership style is very different from the prior superintendents in Washington, D.C., most of whom were men, in that I am not hierarchical. You can be the intern, you can be the person who makes the copies. When we're in a room together and we're trying to figure out the solution to a problem, everybody is equal. And this was something that was really hard for me when I first got to the school district, because in all the organizations that I had run prior to being in the school district, I had created the organization from scratch. So the culture was the way that I was, and the way that I wanted to people to operate, which was we shout, we argue, we debate, we come up with an answer, and then we go out to lunch afterwards, right? And when I got to the school district, I realized that, and this took a little bit of time for me to understand, that people felt like because I was the superintendent, they just had to listen to everything that I was saying. And I brought people into a room once I realized this, and I said, look, I come up with dumb ideas too. If I come up with a dumb idea, I need you to say, that's stupid, we can't do that. I can't have you saying, okay, yeah, and then go implement something when you know it's not right. You got to question me. You have to, challenge me. And sometimes I'm going to stick to my guns, and sometimes you're going to change my mind. But we have to have that kind of a dialogue. And I feel comfortable with that. I don't know whether that's because I'm a woman, and men need to, operate in a different way. I'm not sure if it's a gender thing or not. But it is very different, management-wise, than what I've seen. Other school leaders doing.
Okay. I had read that you had played sports growing up. Were you impacted by Title IX then, do you think?
I did play sports growing up, but I went to an independent school. And so it was a school that was very focused on making sure that girls had just as many opportunities as boys did. And I don't think it was that I was impacted by Title IX directly, so much as probably indirectly with public policy being focused on, ensuring gender equality in things like extracurricular activities. I was fortunate enough to attend a school where proactively they thought, this is a good thing. We're gonna develop better women if we nurture our girls appropriately and give them all the opportunities along the way.
Okay, great. What's the most meaningful or useful piece of advice that you've ever received?
The best piece of advice that I've ever gotten was from Joel Klein, who was the Chancellor of Schools in New York City. And he gave me this piece of advice when I first started in D.C. And he said, lead from the front. And at first when he told me that, I didn't know what he was talking about. So I said, okay. And it didn't take me very long to figure out what he was saying. You know, sometimes, especially in controversial situations, you have to be the person who's out in front. You have to know where you're going. You have to understand this is the best route to take. And even if other people aren't there, you have to be out in front of the issues. If you get too mired in the middle of things, trying to please everybody, trying to sort of placate all the different interests, then I think you often get sort of pulled down and you don't accomplish as much. And so sometimes being out in front is a little lonely, but I think in the end it was one of the best pieces of advice that I got.
Great. What's the one piece of advice that you would give to a young woman?
Well, I have 2 young girls, and so I'm trying to think, one of the things that I often try to tell them is you just have to be you. And I think that's hard for young girls and often for women who are starting their careers. They're trying to fit in, they're trying to figure out what do I need to do, how do I need to act, how do I need to be in order to either be accepted or move up the career ladder, the social ladder, or what have you. And I think that at the end of the day, you will be happiest and you will be most successful if you are just you. If you try to bend to what you think the social norms are or anything else, you're going to end up either being unhappy or just, not being where you want to be in life. So that's the first thing that I would say. I would also say, especially for women kind of at the beginning of their careers, you have to find something that you love doing, that you feel passionately about. The success will come after that. And my mother is somebody who will tell you this fully today. She would say, I wanted my daughter to be a doctor or a lawyer or a stockbroker because I thought that's how she was going to see success. And I never would have guessed that by her becoming a teacher that she would be successful. But for me, it was such a passion. And I just wake up every day and I love what I'm doing and I feel so strongly about it. And so, if you pursue something, not that you think is the right path or that somebody else wants you to do or where you're going to make a lot of money or anything like that, but something that you feel passionately about, then all the rest of those things will fall into place.
Okay, great, really good. And now these are all one-word answers
Okay.
except for the last. When you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
A doctor.
What accomplishment are you most proud of?
Raising 2 great kids.
What was your very first paying job?
I was a waitress at a delicatessen.
Which 3 adjectives best describe you?
I would say driven. I would say goofy. And I would say generative.
Okay, great. Of people that you have met, is there anyone that's had an incredible impact on you?
Somebody that I admire a lot is Warren Buffett. So I've actually met him before, or else I would have answered him to the other question. I admire him greatly because he is somebody who has seen greater success than almost anybody has, and he remains unbelievably humble, and he is so personable, and I think for somebody who has as much wealth as he does, he also has a sense of perspective about things. So his recent comment about, I should be taxed more because I make a whole lot more money. And there's no reason why I should be taxed at a lower rate than the people who work for me who make a lot less money than I do. I just think for somebody in that position to have that sense of perspective is amazing. When I resigned my post in D.C., he wrote me a note which I thought, this is crazy. Why is Warren Buffett writing me a note card? But the fact that he would take the time to do that, and he, just said, despite the fact that this was sort of not the ideal outcome for you, nothing can take away the fact that you have really had an impact, not just on the kids of Washington, D.C., but the kids nationally. And it was just shocking to me. And, I would hope that my kids, me, anybody that I know could be the kind of person who doesn't matter sort of what you accomplish in life, you always sort of stay grounded and remember the little things that matter and kind of make personal connections with people and always keep a sense of perspective. I think that's incredible.